Hello, students. After the introductory part of Dylan Thomas, let us now come to the poems which are prescribed in the course. Two poems are there in the course. One is a refusal to mourn the death by fire of a child in London, and second poem is poem in October. So let us now discuss the poem A Refusal to Mourn the Death by Fire of a Child in London. I'll give a brief introduction about this poem, then I'll come to the text. Now, this poem, A Refusal to Mourn the Death by Fire of a Child in London, is a poem about mourning. The main focus of the poem is that it describes the predicament of the speaker, whether he should mourn or he should not mourn the death of a girl child who is referred to as London's daughter in line 19 of the poem. So actually the issue is this, that the poem describes the predicament of the speaker, the poet, whether he should express sorrow on the death of that London daughter or not. Now look at the title, A Refusal to Mourn the Death. I mean, the poet refuses to mourn the death. Whose death is this? Death of a child who was burnt by fire in London. Now the title indicates the poet's rejection of the conventional means of responding to death. It is a song of grief, no doubt, but quite unusual is this, quite different is this. The poem was written in 1945 and published in the same year in the New Republic, and later in 1946 in Thomas's Deaths and Entrances. Now, the poem is, quite significant because Thomas was living in London during the Nazi, military attacks, which resulted in the deaths of over, 20,000 people. He most likely saw the destruction that resulted from the war firsthand. This poem can be read as a refusal to mourn a singular death. The speaker is using London's daughter, as I have just told you, to represent the many people who died in London during the war. Now, in death, the girl joins life. That is, you have a line, long friends, there in the poem. So the girl will join life, the long line of long friends, those long dead and who are forever alive. And now, when you read the poem, you'll find out that the theme of war and theme of death is there. Theme of death and dying. It is the theme actually which has been taken many times by different poets throughout the ages. I think at a UG level you must have read the poem Death Be Not Proud, and you must be remembering the name of the poet. Death Be Not Proud by John Donne. Similarly, the poem which deals with the theme of death is Don't Go Gentle Into That Good Night by Dylan Thomas. Another poem which has the same theme is Remember by Christina Roggetti. These are the important, and significant examples of the poem where theme of death is prominently explored. Now, in addition to these poems, we have another American poet who is famous for the theme of death, that is Emily Dickinson. And his poem, Because I Could Not Stop for Death, can be taken as the best example of that. A Mother in a Refugee Camp by Chinua Achebe is also, based on that. So we have these poems which are significant for the figurative language, for the evocative, imagery, uh, and they describe the theme of defiance, loss, and especially the certainty of death. Now, this poem is written in the first person, and the poet describes about the child who has died. When we read the poem at first glance, that the poet is concerned primarily with the death of the child. But when the closer reading of the poem reveals that the speaker is, self, centered, because the poet is describing his own experiences. The speaker immediately focuses on himself in the poem rather than describing the child or group of people he's mourning. Uh, he's more concerned with his own response to death rather than the sadness that accompanies death, and the person or persons that have died. Now, the concluding line of the poem, I'll discuss it just now. That the concluding line of the poem is, after the first death, there is no other. Uh, the meaning, yeah, I mean, maybe he wants to convey that while death is final, life itself is eternal. After, the first death, Thomas contends there is no other, because she will become part of the earth and rivers. Uh, Matter can never be destroyed, and a microcosm will get merged with macrocosm. That is there, which I think the poet wants to convey. Uh, Despite the fact that he lived during the period of modernism, as I told you that he rather extended the tradition of the Romantic period. He wrote during the modern era, but he is considered a neo-romantic poet. And this poem, "A Refusal to Mourn the Death by Fire of a Child in London," is quite similar to one other poem entitled Thanatopsis. Thanatopsis. Thanatopsi, Thanatopsis, written by a 19th century American poet, William Cullen Bryant. Now, this poem, Thanatopsis, suggests that one can see death as a return to nature. In the poem, nature reclaims the dead who lie together in the earth. Thanatopsis is basically a Greek word that means meditation or contemplation of death. And the poem is an elegy that attempts to console humans, given that everyone eventually has to die. Uh, this poem, "A Refusal to Mourn the Death by Fire of a Child in London," is a four stanza poem that is divided into sets of six lines, or sestets. The stanzas follow a specific rhyming pattern that remains consistent throughout the entire piece. The lines rhyme A B C A B C. When you read the poem, you will try to match the lines. The first line with fourth one, the second with fifth, and the third with sixth. That is A B C A B C. This is the rhyme pattern which you will find out in this poem. Now let us now start the text. You just have a text in your hand, and look at the text. The text is there at the screen, and I will try to explain it. Never until the mankind making bird, beast, and flower, fathering and all humbling darkness, tells with silence the last light breaking, and the still hour is come of the sea tumbling in harness. And I must enter again the round Zion of the water beat, and the synagogue of the ear of corn. Shall I let pray the shadow of a sound, or sow my salt seed in the least valley of sackcloth to mourn? The majesty and burning of the child's death I shall not murder, the mankind of a going with the grave truth, nor blaspheme down the stations of the breath with any further elegy of innocence and youth. Deep with the first dead lies London's daughter, robed in the long fringe, the grains beyond age, the dark veins of her mother, secret by the unmourning water of the riding Thames. After the first death, there is no other. Now, when you start reading this poem, uh, you know, you have some idea about Dylan Thomas. Now, in the case of Dylan Thomas, the man who suffers and the poet who creates, uh, a significant line which you find in the tradition, The Individual Talent by T.S. Eliot. In the case of Dylan Thomas, who suffers and the poet who creates were not separate, but they are closely linked. Uh, Dylan Thomas himself is the subject of his poetry, and here he gives his own opinion about death. Now he says, "Never until the mankind making bird beast." I've just told you about the rhyme scheme. The rhyme scheme is there: A B C A B C. Look at A B C A B C: making, breaking, flower, R, darkness, harness. So this pattern goes on. Now, never until the mankind. Look at the word never. Now, this word never is connected with 10th line in the stanza 2. This never until the mankind making, and then you have shall I let pray the shadow of a sound. They are connected. How? What is the here never? Uh, Never means the poet is determined never to speak a word of prayer or mourning. He will not mourn the death of the child until. What is this until? He will never mourn the death of the child until the mankind making bird, beast, and flower, fathering and all humbling darkness, tells with silence the last light breaking, and the is still hour means doomsday is come of the seed tumbling in hardness. In the entire stanza, the poet wants to say that he is determined to never to speak a word of prayer or mourning. He will not mourn the death of the child until the you can say the doomsday. Now then the same thought continues, and I must enter again the round Zion of the water beat, and the synagogue of the ear of corn. Shall I let pray the shadow of a sound, or sow my salt seed in the least valley of sackcloth to mourn? Now you have certain words here. The poet says, and I must enter again. The meaning is that till that still hour when the poet will die and become one with the other objects and forces of nature. I mean, he will not mourn the death of the child until the poet will die. Now, then he said the round Zion of the water beat. Zion means Jewish. It is also the name of a small hill in Jerusalem, which is the sacred city of the Jews. Then the word water bead is used. A bead simply means a drop. And by the use of the word bead, actually, the poet is suggesting the holiness. Now, synagogue of the ear of corn. Synagogue is actually the Jewish temple or place of worship. And then he says, "Shall I let pray the shadow of a sound, I told you that this line is in connection with the first line. Uh, Shall I let pray the shadow of a sound? Actually, when we pray, what happens? When we pray, we make sounds. But the poets say that I'm determined not to make any sound by way of prayer. He will not make even the shadow of a sound, even the slightest, whisper. Uh, because he said, I'm not going to mourn, the death of the child. So my salt seed, the poet's seeds are his tears actually, which are saltish, hence infertile. In the last, in the least value of sackcloth. Sackcloth is again holy. It is worn by ascetics and by repentant sinners. Jews actually, according to custom, they wail and mourn in sackcloths. Uh, and this valley of sackcloth is basically any place given over to public mourning. The word least and the least here means smallest. Now, what happens in third stage? The majesty and burning of the child's death. I told you that child was burnt in the bombardment. So this the majesty and burning of the child's death, I shall not murder. And I told you that the child was burnt to death in a fire in London in bombardment by the Germans. Uh, there was something which was very majestic and glorious in the death of that child, something heroic. Uh, and the poet, keeps on saying it that I will never mourn the death until the very end of all, creation. Why? Is I shall not murder. I shall not murder means the poet does not want to spoil. He does not want to reduce the glory and greatness of the death of the child by his mourning. Murder means ruin, spill. So I shall not murder the mankind of mankind here means greatness, heroism, glory. The mankind of her going with a grave truth. Grave has pun here. Two meanings are there. Not blaspheme. Blaspheme is actually to. He says that to mourn the death of the child will be a profanation or blasphemy, for it will diminish the majesty and heroism of its death. It will reduce it to a mere, common place occurrence that I don't want to do. Now, then down the stations of the breath. What happens in the Bible and other Christian scriptures? We have stations of the cross. What is that? Places where crosses have been fixed as reminders to us of the suffering and last agony of the Christ. Places where we must stop and worship. Now the word crosses is here changed to breath. Then he says elegy of innocence and the youth. So the poet says, I will not write any elegies on the youth and innocence of the dead child. There are already so many elegies, so why should I write it? I'm not going to add one more to it because that will be a kind of ruining and spoiling the glory of that child. Deep with the first dead lies London's daughter. Now here we have the reference of that, London's daughter, the child who was burned to death in London during an air raid, as I just told you. Deep with the first dead. Deep means buried deep. First dead, those who were killed in the first air raid. Or you can also say that he gives the reference of Adam and Eve. Deep with the first dead lies London's daughter. London's daughter is buried deep with many people who were already killed in the first air raid, robed in the long, friends. The grains beyond age, The dark veins of a mother, secret by the unmourning water of the riding Thames. After the first death, there is no other. Robed actually carries the suggestion of dignity, glory, and majesty. And grains beyond age are actually the seeds and signs of time. Uh, the long friends, the friends of long standing are actually long standing or seed water, or you can say macrocosm, as I've just told you. The grains beyond is the dark veins of a mother, secret by the unmourning water of the riding teams. After the first death, there is no other. Now, this line can be, ambiguous in the sense that is after the first death there is no other. The poet wants to convey the message that after the first death there is no other, for then one becomes eternal, a part of the holy and glorious process of nature. Thank you very much.